Hey everybody, it's the Commodore from the Clan of the Grey Wolf, and you are watching the weekly Wringer series here on clanofthegreywolf.com. Another elongated week this week, hope you guys don't mind, but I am back and ready to rock and roll about a question that I asked you for last week, which I thought was actually very thought-provoking, and you guys did not disappoint in terms of your comments. A lot to talk about today, maybe probably more than normal, even though last week's video was fairly long. You know, there's a lot to cover in the conversation this week, and so we will. In any case, so I'm going to get into the question I asked you guys about last week about your shame, your guilt, or the disdain that you felt, or the mockery that you felt being a geek in one way, shape, or form. And we'll get into a nice conversation about that and what it means to kind of instill geek culture and how that's changed over the years. I think a lot of all those things will be fair game. I want to ask you guys, there's going to be a question for next week at the end of this, as there always is, for that should, I think, have all of you that are following the election. There's going to be, you know, a pretty divisive, equally divisive kind of question, I think, at the end of this thing that should have you guys really digging deep to, you know, try to answer this question. I think it's going to be a good one for you. In any case, so that's going to be what we're going to look forward to. But I always, as I begin really every show, is to is this a show? I'm going to say episode. Okay, let's say episode. As I begin every, I don't know why I said that. I begin every episode with really tying in and welcoming all of our new commenters for the week. So a lot of times, really, what the show really needs to keep going is commenters, and we love all of our constant commenters that are always there. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't have people kind of continuing the conversation, it just doesn't happen. So I want to welcome all the people, as I always do, to the community. First, Mega Man X4321, I wanted to say welcome to you. That's pretty self-explanatory. We all pretty much know that you must be a Mega Man fan, and God bless you for that. Welcome to the community. Elk the Lad is what I'm going to go with, maybe other than ELC the Lad, but in any case, Elk the Lad, welcome to you. Great to have you as a part of the Weekly Wringer. Very clever username. No, I'm not using that as an ironic joke. That is the username of someone that has registered and has commented, so welcome to you. Very clever username. Perhaps it's like an open-ended thing where we're supposed to imagine something that's very clever. And then the next one, which I have a difficult time, I have a very difficult time pronouncing this one, Bonanob. I guess I'm going to go with Bonanob on that one. I'm going to say that one. And so welcome to you. And also the Opium Smoker, which, you know, hey, look, I mean, I really feel for you, man. I hope they're not taking over your life, because that would be really sad. But anyway, welcome to you. I'm glad to have you on the community as well. Apparently, opium smoker's addiction has nothing to do with drugs. It actually has to do with The Simpsons. But that's a completely different story. Anyway, welcome to all of you. Thanks for commenting, and thanks for being a part of the Weekly Wringer. Very, very glad to have you on board. Can't wait to see what you guys say in future Weekly Wringers to come. Okay, so now let's get back to the question that I asked you guys last time, which was about shame. Remember I told you guys I watched Trekkies 2, and it kind of got this thought kicking around in my mind of really what kind of shame and disdain we get from people in our lives about particular subjects. And I asked you what element of your geekdom really was, you know, that which caused the greatest amount of disdain or mockery in your life. And there were a lot of interesting answers. Now, as I have become, you know, I guess regularly doing here on the show is to talk about the kind of constant themes I saw throughout. And I'm going to do that again today, because there were a lot of constant themes, and I don't want to make anybody think that I left them out, because there were so many people that kind of made some really good comments this week. It was very difficult to pick. But first is that, you know, I think a lot of you expressed some frustration with yourself, maybe not necessarily that other people put on you, although that was the case in some scenarios as well, that, you know, video games kind of replaced your social interaction, or at least your face-to-face social interaction. And when something like that happened, it made you feel guilty, or it made you kind of put some of that pain and strain on yourself. And for some of you also, it was external parties doing that. I saw that was a pretty common occurrence. And, you know, I think we've all, as gamers, probably felt that way. If you obsess about other kinds of things, like movies or music, what have you, then you've probably also done the same thing with that, where you feel like you can kind of escape books, reading, those kinds of things where people will actually, I know a lot of people that would just go take a book and would just kind of lose an entire day or lose an entire weekend to a book, and I always thought that was the same kind of thing. Why would you want to spend time doing that when you could, spend time with social interaction? But many of you kind of saw that theme going through your comments, so I wanted to mention that. The other thing is that geek culture has really changed. Many of you mentioned this, that now we are kind of in the age of the geek. I was watching an interesting documentary that I thought was okay. I'd probably give it a B minus, called America in Prime Time, which is on Netflix now. And they have an episode on the misfit, which really says this. We are in kind of the age of the geek nowadays. So the misfits aren't kind of the kind of, relegated to the bottom of the pile kind of, not very popular comic relief or whatever, what have you, for the old shows. Now it's kind of the geeks are kind of, the misfits are the kind of subject matter du jour. It's what everybody wants to be. We live in a world of The Big Bang Theory, for example, which is very much, I think, really goes overboard in a lot of its characterizations and its overuse of stereotypes of geeks. But in many ways, that show is popular among people that are geeks and among people that are not geeks because it speaks to something that I think is about the coolness of geekdom, and something like Glee or something like that, which I don't really like. I know some people that do like Glee. Glee has the same kind of thing. You just become these gleeks, right? So geek culture has changed. It's not the same as it used to be. So maybe we don't live in the same world with pocket protectors and thick-rimmed glasses and being kind of persecuted for that, as it might have been in a previous age. The other thing I was really surprised about was that most of you, this was not even just some of you, most of you weren't necessarily referring to people outside of your cliques for the derision you found, for your particular affection or obsession, right? So, in other words, I was really surprised about the geek-on-geek hate that was going on here. I didn't expect that. I expected many of you to say, well, I got picked on in school, and that happened. Several of you talked about that. But what was amazing to me is that many of you put that your geeky friends would actually hate on you for being geeky about something or what have you. That was really surprising to me. I didn't expect that. You expect to see that kind of behavior, or at least I would. And one of the reasons why, this goes to show you how well you guys adapt the question sometimes. I expected this question to be a big kind of like, oh, well, you should hear about this story that happened to me in high school. Some of you did that. But no, what ended up happening was many of you kind of said, hey, my geeky friends thought I was really crazy geeky for doing X. It's like, there you go. Not X. I mean XYZ, variables. Different story. Anyway, so that was another thing. And the other thing that I want to talk about, and we'll come back to this in a little bit, is how many of you selected the fact that you listen to music soundtracks. Coming off our conversation from last week, where I had mentioned how much I loved the Symphony of the Night soundtrack. Music from video games tends to be almost a universal indicator for many of you about how geeky you are, and it's something that shows to all of the people that you speak to on a daily basis. I find that pretty interesting as well. Anyway, let's get into some of the specifics here. Sonic Rose talked about something right off the top that I just thought was perfect. And I have such tremendous sympathy and empathy for this. And that is being able to celebrate and share almost your video game prowess, but let's just call it, instead of prowess, let's call it accomplishments. This is absolutely true. Sonic Rose talks about being able to go and hang out at work and even have some people that are geeky there and say, you don't just bust out and be like, well, you know what I did last night? I actually built an entirely new house in Minecraft that has a wood foundation and, whatever the case may be, it's fully decorated internally or whatever. Okay, that's awesome. That's really cool. But at the end of the day, you want to share that. You want to show other people what you've done. And that can be really difficult and can really open you up for a lot of derisiveness and a lot of mockery. If you go to, your standard workplace and you just start talking about how you've done that, most people are going to be like, wow, you are a freak, right? Like, what the heck? Why did you spend all that time doing that? And which is kind of funny. But in any case, I think you guys all know the kind of lack of empathy you're going to get for that. But I thought that resonated so wonderfully true. I'll tell you a story a little bit later about something that happened to me with that in mind. So I thought that was a great way to kick things off. Pyros was the first one that was talking about geek on geek hate. Really because Pyros enjoys Deep Space Nine more than the Next Generation. I know there were a couple other things, but that's so fascinating to me. Right? I mean, because at the end of the day, what that made me think of is that, for people that enjoyed Voyager over the Next Generation or Voyager over Deep Space Nine, I have absolutely no respect for those people. Like, I just don't understand that. How is that possible? Right? And so I have my own biases, right? I have my own hierarchy of geekdom, and I think, at one point in an Echo Screen way, way, way back, we talked about this. We talked about the hierarchy of geekdom. And, at the very least, it was something we kicked around as a big idea, that there are people that like, kind of popular things that tend to be a little geeky. And then you have, like, people that write, fan fiction that they publish on their own, webzine. That's, you get all the way down, right? Or I'm not meaning to demean anyone here. I'm just saying that I think all of us have the perception of what we think of as the hierarchy of geekdom. And I was really surprised, and as Pyros put it, that there was this kind of geek on geek, rage. That there's kind of geeks here and geeks here, and they were trying to kind of like disposition each other by virtue of the fact that you prefer Deep Space Nine over the Next Generation. I just think that's really interesting. Mr. K, totally brilliant story. Exactly the kind of thing I was looking for. This was one of the highlights of my week. Thank you so much, Mr. K, as always. If you have not yet read the Luke Skywalker narrative from Mr. K, you must, I underline must, do so. It is a wonderful story and something that I think we all could take a look at and empathize with. A lot of times we do get selected and we do get picked for certain things by virtue of some of our interests that don't necessarily match up. Remember, Mr. K wasn't necessarily even a huge Star Wars fan as much as he was a Star Trek fan, and then he gets tapped because of his geekiness to be playing Luke Skywalker on the marching band field, which in some ways is an amazing thing anyway. Another thing that many of us get picked on for is the fact that we were in marching band. When I tell people I was in marching band, I see them kind of secretly smile about how, wow, that's so sad, right? And you must be such a geek. Which is interesting, because I always liked being in marching band. I don't have any kind of problem admitting that. I had a really good time with it. So, but anyway, different story. But I thought it was great. Mr. K, kind of multiple levels of geekdom, and that is a sublime story with Luke Skywalker that made my week. If you haven't read it, read it now. Iceman talked about the idea of being in a clan in WoW. This speaks to what I was talking about before with the idea of video games replacing your social interaction. The idea that, and this is how I learned, folks, and I'll go ahead and tell this story, but I remember coming home from my first year of college to see my friends back in my hometown. I know all of us have done this in some, maybe you went to college where you grew up, so maybe this doesn't apply to many of you. But for those of you that moved away and then never came back, you understand what I'm talking about. You come back, you go to meet with your friends. Well, when I realized this was a problem was when I came back from college and several of my friends were in WoW clans and they had raids that they were going on when we were home, and therefore they couldn't hang out. Back in high school it was always like, we're going to go hang out. Let's go. And it was always, yeah, okay, let's rock and roll. And then all of a sudden it became, well, what are we doing? Where are we going? When is it happening? All these particulars around it, as if it would, the whole world would change. And I just thought that was so stupid. It's like, at that point I realized I was never going to get into one of those MMORPGs that was going to completely dedicate my time. The only way I would get into one is if I could kind of jump in and out of it as I liked. Because that I thought was absolutely crazy. You've missed time with your friends because you have to sit down and play a video game. If you can't